Hey guys, welcome to our study of the animal kingdom. We have done, every other type of kingdom that we have of living things. We talked about the two kingdoms of bacteria. We talked about the Protus kingdom. We talked about the fungi kingdom. We just wrapped up our study of the plant kingdom, and now we're going to take a look at the animal kingdom. The animal kingdom is actually the largest kingdom in that it has the most complex organisms in it, okay? Which is why we save the animal kingdom for the very end. And the animal kingdom I find to be most exciting because when we're talking about the different types of animals, a lot of times you don't really realize that these organisms that you're looking at are in fact animals, okay? So I really enjoy talking about the different phylum of animals that we have in the animal kingdom and taking a look at the different types of animals that we have. So with that, let's dive into our study of the animal kingdom. Now, just as with the other kingdoms that we looked at, there are general characteristics that can be applied to the majority of the animals, the organisms in a particular kingdom. And animals, just like the other kingdoms, have some general characteristics to them. Now, I want you to keep in mind that there always are going to be these exceptions to every rule. Not all animals are going to exhibit all these general characteristics that we talk about today. All right. However, generally speaking, all animals have these particular characteristics, and that is animals are multicellular. There is not a unicellular type of animal. There are microscopic types of animals, but they're not unicellular, they are multicellular. They're just very small, and the best way to see them is using a microscope. All animals are composed of eukaryotic cells. However, what makes an animal is the fact that they are multicellular and their cells do not have cell walls. Therefore, when we're talking about the different groups of animals, you might think to yourself, how is that possibly an animal? But the thing to keep in mind is that an animal is a multicellular organism composed of eukaryotic cells that do not have cell walls. That's what makes an animal an animal. Animals are heterotrophic. They're not able to make their own food. They have to obtain their food from outside sources. And when we're talking heterotrophic, there are three types of animals. You have carnivores, which are meat eaters. That means that they eat other animals. Okay? A lot of animals that you can probably think of off the top of your head, like cats and dogs, for example, are meat eaters. There are certain animals that are herbivores, meaning they're plant eaters. All right, if you think of like rabbits and you think of deer, all right, they eat plants. They're herbivores. But then you have animals such as us, being humans, and that we are omnivores. We are, generally speaking, animals that eat both other animals and plants. Animals mostly are motile, meaning they can move from point A to point B on their own. The majority of animals are motile. Some animals are sessile, which means they stay in one spot and capture food as it passes by. The first two phyla of animals that we're going to be discussing are the ones that are sessile. And again, these are ones that you would not often think to be animals, but they are in fact animals. Animals reproduce both sexually and some reproduce asexually. All right, and when we say that animals reproduce sexually, that means they develop from a zygote. And if you remember, a zygote is formed when a sperm fertilizes an egg. Animals have what is called specialization of cells, which means there's many types of cells and each that have a particular function. Now, let's go back to the organization of life, and I've referred to this several times throughout our study of the different kingdoms of living things. But the organization of life is that the smallest living thing is a cell. Cells that perform the same function form what are called tissues. Tissues that perform the same function form what are called organs. Organs that perform the same function form organ systems, and then organ systems, work together to form an organism. Now, with our plant kingdom, we looked at the fact that they have cells that form tissues, that form organs, and then they form the organism. Generally speaking, the majority of animals follow all 5 levels of organization, in that they have cells that form tissues, that form organs, that form organ systems, that then form an organism. However, going back to the specialization of cells, this is a major advantage to the organisms in the animal kingdom, because this is much more efficient, all right, than having just, each type of cell cannot survive without the rest of the organism. And as I said, this is much more efficient than one cell doing it all. All right? Now, animals have complicated body plans. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, animals are very diverse, and so they differ in shape and structure. And again, a lot of the beginning phylums of animals that we're going to be talking about, you wouldn't even think to be an animal. You look at them and you say, how is that possible that it's an animal? But remember, I said, just to be an animal, it means you're multicellular and the cells do not have cell walls. Okay, so let's go back to tissues. I said tissues are formed from a group of similar cells that perform the same function. Okay, well, animals have this. All animals have this, at least to the tissue level. Okay. Animals go through a process of forming layers of cells and layers of tissues, and this process is called gastrulation. All right, well, what does this mean? Well, I said all animals reproduce sexually, which means they form from a zygote. Okay, and a zygote is formed from fertilization. When a sperm fertilizes an egg, it forms what is called the zygote. The zygote will then go through several cleavages or divisions to form what is called a blastula. And a blastula is actually a hollow ball of cells. Now, once the blastula is formed, then 3 specific germ layers or layers of cells form within that blastula. And these 3 layers are, first, you have the endoderm, which is the single layer. It's the inner layer. And a way to remember that is endo, in. And the endoderm becomes the digestive tract and the respiratory system for those very complex animals. There's also the ectoderm, which is the single layer, and it's the outer layer. All right, and if you think outer layer, that's going to become the epidermis, or the skin. And it also turns into becomes the nervous system, so the nerves and the sense organs. And then in between the two, you have what's called the mesoderm, which is the middle layer. And that will eventually become muscles, reproductive organs, and circulatory vessels. All right? And here you have a diagram that shows you this gastrulation process, okay? You can see the zygote there on the left. It kind of looks like the little ball, all right, that forms the hollow ball of cells, which is the blastula. Now, that's actually a cross-section of the blastula. Like if somebody took a blastula and cut it in half, that's what you would look at, and you can see how it's hollow inside. And then the blastula goes through this gastrulation process that forms these 3 germ layers. You can see the endoderm there is in the middle. All right, the ectoderm is that outer layer, and then the mesoderm is what forms in the middle. All right? Now, animals also exhibit body symmetry. All right, now what does that mean? Well, body symmetry is if you slice the body in half along a central axis, it produces mirror images of one another. Okay? If you think about a human externally, standing straight up and down, if you drew a line from the head down to the feet, all right, it would cut the body equally in half, and there's mirror images on both sides externally. There's an eye on each side, half the nose on each side, half the mouth on each side. Moving down the body, there's an arm on each side, a leg on each side, okay, with the hands and the feet. It's mirror images, all right? All animals exhibit one of 3 types of body symmetry, all right? The first one is called asymmetrical, which means there's no symmetry. You can't divide that body in half and have mirror images on both sides. There's only one phylum of animals that really are asymmetrical. Then you have what's called radial symmetry. And if you think radial, for those of you who enjoy cars, all right, and know things about cars, you think radial tire, all right. Radial is like a wagon wheel, okay? It's wheel-like symmetry. And if you think of a wagon wheel, there's spokes that connect going all the way through the wheel. It's symmetry on an axis in any direction, all right? And I'll show you what that means. And then you have the type of symmetry that humans exhibit, and that is the bilateral symmetry, with symmetry with a vertical line down the middle of the body. The majority of animals are bilateral. They exhibit this bilateral symmetry. There's one phylum, as I said, of animals that's asymmetrical, and there's one phylum of animals that exhibits this radial symmetry. There are actually two phylums of animals that exhibit this radial symmetry. The majority of animals exhibit bilateral symmetry, which would be very similar to humans. All right. Now, bilateral symmetry is very important because it enables animals to go through what's called cephalization. And that is where the sense organs and most nerves are concentrated at the front end of the body, which allows for quicker response. If you think about it with a human, okay, the sense organs and most nerves concentrated at the front end of the body, that would be like the brain being in the skull, which would be the top of our body. And then the nerves radiate out through the entire body. A lot of lower level animals, such as worms, when we say the sense organs and most nerves are concentrated at the front end of the body, it would be at the front, literally, of that particular body. And as we go through the different phylum of animals, I'll point out the cephalization to you. All right, and here's a diagram that shows you the different types of symmetry that I just talked about. The asymmetrical, okay, I'm not sure if you would recognize what that animal is, but that animal is a sponge, all right, and that does not have symmetry at all. There's no body symmetry. You can't cut it in half in any way and produce mirror images. All right, then you have the radial symmetry, which is when you look down onto one of these animals, you can see that you can cut that animal in many different directions. And it doesn't matter which direction you cut it in, looking down, all right, it's going to exhibit symmetry on any one of those, on any point in the axis. And then you have that, it's either a lobster or a crayfish, that exhibits for you the bilateral symmetry, where you can see if you if you cut that body down, straight down the middle, you have a mirror image on both sides. All right? Now, these are the general characteristics of organisms in the animal kingdom. And what we're going to be doing next is we're going to be delving into the different groups of animals. And animals can actually be separated into two major categories, and that is the invertebrates and the vertebrates. Invertebrates are animals that do not have a backbone, and vertebrates are animals that do have a backbone. Most of the time when you think of animals, you're thinking of vertebrates. It's the invertebrates that are intriguing as far as how is it possible that those are animals, okay? But again, remember I said animals are multicellular organisms that have eukaryotic cells that do not possess a cell wall, all right? Now, with this, I have asked you to take a look at a video from Bill Nye the Science Guy where he's talking about invertebrates. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, please watch that video, and in our next video, we will pick up with our study of invertebrates.